Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber, joined here by trial attorney Brad Micklin, and thanks for joining us here on the program where we break down the biggest live trials and legal stories in the news today. We have a lot to cover, so let's get started. Now, Brad, first thing I was so happy about in the report is Robert Mueller got rid of that word collusion, because it's not a legal term. He was talking about conspiracy, cooperation, this coordination. Were you surprised that none of what we've seen, the behavior, the actions, rose to the level of conspiracy?
I'm not surprised because from the very beginning, Trump has been saying things like, I'm innocent, I don't know anything illegal, and I'm not going to pardon anybody. And that's a very broad statement to make that early into the investigation. So I think he was very, very confident that while he knew there was interference, because that's been established,
right,
he didn't participate and didn't know anybody who did participate.
At the very least, though, they benefited from some of the information that was provided to them.
Yes.
Now, there was a question of, did they know who was giving them what? Was it more of a question that they had all these independent actors doing what they were doing, but they just weren't working together, but they were benefiting from each other?
I don't know exactly. I think it's sort of the higher standard issue, that people are trying to hold everybody to the standard that what they knew was happening may have been wrong, but didn't do anything about it. And then everybody lied about it afterwards, which is why we see so many prosecutions from it. But nobody actually did anything illegal. They just may not have known what they were doing was not illegal.
Barr made it very clear that someone can disseminate this information, publish this information, but it's not technically illegal unless they were part of the hacking scheme. Why do you think he made that so clear in the press conference? Is this pointing to something like what what Trump Jr. would have been doing, what WikiLeaks was doing, the idea of getting this information, maybe even what Roger Stone was doing, because he was indicted, but nothing about a conspiracy? Nothing about collusion, right?
I think there was so much going on. There were so many people involved. I mean, over 500 witnesses. We had 25 prosecutions. We have several people going to jail for lying to Congress and to the government. I think Barr has to be very clear in what he projects to the American people, because we've been waiting so long for this report, and the report itself raises a lot of questions that Barr is trying, I think, to quash at the onset, because this is going to be far from over.
What do we do about Russia?
Well, I think there's already a prosecution against some Russian officials for their interception, but that's going to be a hard thing to do. I mean, first of all, they're obviously in a different country, and it's hard to prosecute people, and I don't think this is over. I think that's why there were so many redactions in his report.
So the important thing from the first part of the report, the volume 1, is identifying that Russia's the bad actor, and thank goodness no U.S. citizen was actually coordinating or cooperating with Russia to to interfere in the election. That's the good thing. I guess the question is, how does we prevent this from 2020 happening again? A foreign actor creating spear phishing emails to hack into the DNC, or, these kinds of fake social media campaigns that targeted millions of Americans. How do you do it?
I think the one good thing that comes out of something like this is we learn where our weaknesses are. We learn where we're vulnerable. And we can now increase security. Because remember, social media and internet and email doesn't go that far back. This is the first time that I know of a large-scale international breach like this. I think everybody's been working since day one to fix it and prevent it.
Well, we got a lot to talk about with this report, don't we? We're going to go through 448 pages, page by page, footnote by footnote. Just kidding. We're going to go through the biggest points. We're going to take a break. When we come back, a lot more to cover, including the obstruction of justice component. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. We're still breaking down a fun, little comical read, a little light read known as the Mueller report that dropped yesterday. What a development it was. 448 pages divided into 2 volumes. We just discussed volume 1 about the fact that Robert Mueller did not find any evidence of a conspiracy or coordination between any United States citizen and Russia in order to interfere in the 2016 election. That includes President Trump and anybody from his campaign. There was no collusion. But I'm glad, maybe I'm the only one, that he actually threw that term out and said there's no legal term known as collusion. It's really conspiracy. Now, let's move on to volume 2, the obstruction of justice. William Barr, Attorney General William Barr, in his press conference before the report was released, talked a little bit more about what we could expect in this volume. Brad, I'm going to ask you the million-dollar question. Do you agree with the analysis, the conclusion of Attorney General William Barr, after looking at the Mueller report, that if you look at all of the facts, and he didn't dispute the facts, he didn't dispute the episodes, that this did not rise to the level of obstruction?
I'm torn because the report found 2 things I think were important. First, that there was concern about raising a criminal charge against the sitting president. And two, that he took several steps that others refused to follow through. And that's what prevented the finding of obstruction. So I think the question comes down to, did he know what he was doing would be obstruction, or that if completed could have been obstruction? But then I think he didn't remove the people that didn't follow his instructions. So maybe he realized, knowing how many people he's removed from his cabinet and his staff, that maybe he realized that they're making the right judgment.
It's interesting because if that was the first part, is if Robert Mueller really was constrained by providing a decision because of, he said in the report, there's a lot of considerations at play, including the fact that the Office of Legal Counsel has this guideline that a sitting president cannot be indicted, and it would be unfair to press charges against him because he would not be able to defend himself in an open court. That would have been the answer I was looking for. But here it's saying, Attorney General William Barr is saying that all this evidence, if we link it up to the law, it just doesn't rise to obstruction. I guess I'm confused as to why Robert Mueller punted it.
I think he didn't want to make the finding because he says a lot of different things. He says there were acts they weren't followed through, that if we went to a trial, we might not meet our burden of proof. Those are issues that are supposed to be decided after a trial begins. You don't take a 2-year investigation with 2,800 subpoenas and then say, well, we don't know if we could prove it, so we're not going to even try. His job is to prosecute.
I want to continue on, though, with Attorney General William Barr when he talks about in this press conference the obstruction. It's really important. Okay, so there Attorney General William Barr is making it very clear that no one influenced what information would not be seen, and that seemed to be very straightforward. The thing that's not straightforward to me, Brad, and I want to talk to you about this because I'm still a little confused, Robert Mueller made it very clear that you can have obstruction of justice even if there's no underlying crime. In other words, if President Trump always knew that there was no collusion, then, normally what was he hiding, right? But he made it very clear, Robert Mueller, that you can have obstruction, you can try to be impeding an investigation or obstructing investigation if your motives are personal motives, if you're worried about embarrassment, if you're worried about the fact that certain information might be uncovered that you think might be criminal. And in many of those episodes, Mueller speculated about a lot of the different motives that he would have had, but each one of them, he made a point, was to end the investigation. So I guess I'm confused here. What's going on?
Again, it's hard to say, and I keep going back and forth because if you look at Trump's conduct in the very beginning, he said, oh, this is the end of my presidency. But then he gave unfettered access to all the documents and said, I'm not going to pardon anybody. But the issue of obstruction comes down to the act of impeding something. And while he tried to, it seems like he didn't or wasn't effective, and that's what Mueller rested his hand on.
Is that legally accurate? So in other words, there was another part of the report where it said a lot of the president's actions never actually unfolded and his results never unfolded because a lot of people didn't do what he ordered them to do or directed them to do. But is that what obstruction is? Unless that person carried out those orders, it would have been a much clear-cut case of obstruction? I mean, you tell me.
It's hard to say, again, because we were talking on break where if I hired you to go and murder somebody, but you don't do it, I've still committed a crime. But I don't know if there's an attempt to obstruct that could be a crime or his actions were unlawful.
I guess the thing that I'm confused about is when I saw William Barr's letter and it said there was difficult questions of fact and law, I would be looking at each one of these legal episodes and be torn and said, oh, I can kind of see. It seemed a lot more straightforward. I mean, especially the one episode that I want to talk about is where he accuses, he says that Trump ordered McGahn to have the special counsel removed. If you look at how that's laid out, what other alternative can you have than he wanted that investigation ended?
Well, and there's so many, aside from the 10 acts that they found, they also made reference to the fact that he's so influential. Just his desire and his attempts to do these things that weren't carried out might still have affected other people and obstructed. And I just think they were doing everything they could to not find a crime.
There's a possibility Mueller will be subpoenaed and will have to appear before Congress. Do you think they're going to ask about whether or not he agrees with Barr's reasoning? And do you think he agrees with Barr's reasoning?
I'm not really sure. I think, again, because Mueller is the one who drafted this report,
Sure.
not Barr. And I think Mueller either was directed some way beforehand or just really didn't want to be the person to make history by saying, let's charge a sitting president.
So you think at the very beginning he was never going to charge him. He was going to provide this evidence and give the reader the opportunity, like a pick your own adventure in your way.
I think he would give every single benefit of the doubt until he absolutely had no choice but to find there was a crime committed.
When Barr says that they disagreed under legal theories, what does that mean?
It means that somebody thought there was a crime committed.
And somebody did. I mean, that's the interesting part. We're trying to make sense of it. And one of the things, Brad, I'm curious about, the fact that the president didn't assert executive privilege, what does that tell you?
That he wasn't afraid of the report. Because remember, not only did he not assert the privilege, he didn't ask for any redaction, which Barr made abundantly clear. He provided also during the investigation written answers to questions. And he also, in Mueller's reports, gave unfettered access to information. So that's not a guilty mind.
He can't be happy with it, though, because there was a lot of information in there that could be seen as highly embarrassing to him and behavior that is questionable. And in fact, I believe, I just read on Twitter, that he called this the crazy Mueller report.
Right. Well, that's what I love about Trump is he doesn't hold back. But if you look at his statements in the very beginning of the investigation where he said, this is the end of my presidency, he had to be concerned. He's just now happy that it's not and that he's been or to some extent exonerated of these allegations.
Do you think it was appropriate for Barr to hold a press conference and provide a 4-page summary in anticipation of the report? It almost felt like instructions before you're given an exam. This is what our guideline is, this is how you should think about it. Or, because what would have happened if the report was just released without any preamble?
Barr did more than he needed to when that summary was released because a special counsel statute says that the report is supposed to be confidential. Barr released it because he knew there was such a public outcry for it, and the release of the redacted report and this press conference was all because of public pressure, not because he's required to.
Do you think we're missing anything by not having a fully unredacted report?
Not right now. I think the reason for the redaction are largely ongoing investigations and privacy concerns for other people that were investigated. There's nothing wrong with keeping it out of the public hands.
Now, let me ask you this. The Mueller, provided his conclusions in terms of collusion. Very clear-cut case. Obstruction, not the same thing. Do you think it was appropriate for him to say, while this report does not, charge the president with any crimes, it does not exonerate the president? What do you make of that statement?
I think there was a mistake. I think first, if he was charged with the investigation, he should make a finding. He should make a decision. And if you don't have that finding, you shouldn't say, we're not sure. We don't exonerate it. It opens the question, and he should have known that that was going to be grabbed by everybody, especially Democrats, to jump on that we still don't have an answer to this. We need more investigation.
Why do you do it? Why do you write that?
I keep going back to, I just think he was afraid of making the wrong decision, that he was afraid of finding that a sitting president committed a crime. But I also I don't think he wanted to say, we're certain he didn't commit a crime, in case it was later determined by another party or another branch of government that he did.
So who was it directed towards? Who was supposed to read this report and make the determination about obstruction or not if it wasn't him? Do you think he directed it towards Congress? Do you think he directed it towards William Barr? Because based upon what William Barr said yesterday in his press conference, he had a conversation with Mueller, or he heard that Mueller said when Mueller found out that Attorney General William Barr determined there was no obstruction, he said it's his choice, it's his discretion. That's not necessarily saying I agree with him.
Right. I mean, at the beginning of the investigation, Mueller knew that the statute required the report to be confidential. But by the end, when he actually wrote it, he knew or had to know it was going to be somehow released at some point in time. So I think he was writing that to everybody.
And do you think his analysis was correct, Mueller, in the sense that, there was a legal framework to it? Do you think he was right in terms of what obstruction of justice means, what Article 2 means in terms of how it's related to a president's abilities to conduct business, but also can be investigated for obstruction of justice, that no one's above the law? Because he spent a portion of the end of that report on that, but I was wondering if people wanted more.
I wanted more. I don't really agree with the finding. I think the problem I had with the obstruction issue is if it was 10 different things and he took one step and it looked like obstruction, okay, but this is one issue about the interference and he took at least 10, all focused on one thing. I think collectively that's more than each individual, and I think they're relying on each individual wasn't an act of obstruction.
Do you think he knew this report would be made public, Mueller? Do you think he put things in there that he knew American people might see one day?
I think so. There's no way to avoid this was going to come out in some way or another when he wrote it. Again, not when he started it, but when he wrote it, absolutely.
But now Democrats are using this as a weapon, right? They're using it as a weapon to fight in the court of public opinion.
They would have used anything as a weapon, whether it completely exonerated him or not. They'd either find something in there to allege that Mueller was influenced, or they return back to the bank statements and tax return issues.
See, I just feel that we've gone back to where we were even before the summary, when every TV pundit, every lawyer, everybody across the country was acting as a legal analyst trying to determine if the president broke the law or not. And I don't know if the report added anything more to it.
I think this comes down to whichever side that you sit on. If you support Trump, you support the report. If you don't, you don't. But the people in the middle don't care.
It's a good point. It's a good point. We have a little bit more to talk about with the Mueller report because it really is quite an in-depth document. Ed, thanks so much for coming on. Appreciate you breaking down this case as well as the Mueller report with me. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Jess.